This is the GoreTV podcast with your hosts Jill Valentine and Sebastian Castellanos. Let's get into the show.
All right, strap yourselves in because today's deep dive is taking us right into the heart of Resident Evil 1.5. And this isn't just some dusty old game demo, right? This is like peeking into a whole alternate timeline for survival horror. Like what could have been, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's wild how it went from like a direct sequel to something way more unsettling. Think about this. You're trapped in the RPD, the Raccoon City Police Department.
Okay, yeah.
But forget that grand, almost gothic architecture from Resident Evil 2.
Oh, you mean like ditching the whole spooky mansion vibe?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's completely different. Imagine the RPD, but it's this brutalist nightmare, you know, like concrete's crumbling, lights are flickering, the city's already gone.
Oh, wow.
GoreTV called it a concrete tomb.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a perfect image, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just an outbreak. This is a city that's already been consumed by it.
See, this is why they call this a lost chapter in horror. But speaking of lost, what about this Elza Walker character? She's like the forgotten hero, right?
Yeah. It's almost tragic, you know? Like here we are all these years later, and she's still stuck in development hell.
Ooh. Yeah.
Imagine being that close to video game stardom.
And then, bam, gone.
Gone.
What makes her story so interesting, GoreTV made it sound like she's a much more relatable hero.
Totally. Yeah, because Elza, she was just a college student, right? So when the outbreak hits, she's completely blindsided. There's no like military training, no connection to like Umbrella or anything.
Right.
Just an ordinary person thrust into this extraordinary nightmare.
Wow.
It's not Jill Valentine going up against bioweapons. It's just pure survival.
Oh, so it's way more visceral.
Oh, absolutely. Raw and terrifying.
I can see why they call her the lost protagonist then. But okay, let's talk about how this game actually played. What set 1.5 apart? What would we have actually experienced if Capcom hadn't pulled the plug?
Remember those classic, you know, almost slow, methodical zombie encounters from the first Resident Evil?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can forget all about those in this one. 1.5 was going for full-on, relentless hordes of zombies.
Oh, wow.
Instead of picking them off strategically, you're just running, constantly trying to survive this wave of infected that never seems to end.
Oh, so it's like constant
Except it's
pressure.
Pressure, yeah.
Intense. Like it's one thing to outrun like one zombie, but to outrun like the whole
The apocalypse.
the apocalypse itself. But here's the thing, right? GoreTV mentions it was basically done. So why scrap it? What made Capcom just like slam the vault door on this thing?
Well, you know, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's a question that's haunted gamers for, what, like 2 decades now?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there's this silence just adds to the mystery, don't you think?
Oh, totally. Like, it's that old horror movie rule. What you don't see is always way scarier.
Right.
What are the theories, though? Like, did Capcom stumble onto something, you know, too real, too disturbing, even for, like, hardcore horror fans?
Right. Well, GoreTV threw out a couple of interesting possibilities. One theory focuses on those massive zombie hordes we were talking about.
Yeah, the endless horde.
Right. And remember, this was back in the PlayStation 1 era.
Oh, yeah.
Technically speaking, like just rendering that many enemies on screen
Oh, man.
while trying to keep the atmosphere and like decent gameplay. That would have been a huge challenge.
Yeah, you couldn't just, like, sprinkle in a few more polygons and call it a day.
No.
Those old consoles were already working overtime.
They were. Pushing the PlayStation to its limits back then, it could have meant sacrificing other things, you know, like frame rate, visuals. And for a horror game, especially one that relies on atmosphere, those compromises could have killed it.
Totally. Nothing kills the mood like a zombie horde doing the jitterbug because the frame rate can't keep up.
Exactly.
Okay, so tech limitations, they might have been a factor. But what about the content itself? GoreTV uses some pretty intense words like raw, unrelenting when describing the horror here. Do you think Capcom got cold feet?
It's definitely possible. The gaming world back then was a different beast, right? I mean, survival horror was still finding its footing.
It's still pretty new.
Relatively, yeah. And 1.5's whole thing, that vision of a city completely overrun, the constant struggle against impossible odds. It might have been a tough sell, especially for gamers who were expecting, you know, something more like the first Resident Evil.
Yeah, with puzzles and like...
Puzzles, resource management.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe a bit too ahead of its time.
Maybe. I mean, gamers today, they eat that stuff up, you know, that gritty realism. But back then, who knows?
This is a different world.
Totally. And plus there's the whole cultural context to consider, right? The mid-90s had a different view of like violence and horror in media.
Yeah, for sure.
It's possible. 1.5, whether it meant to or not, kind of like stepped into territory that even Capcom, and they're known for pushing boundaries, wasn't quite ready to deal with.
Interesting. So we've got like potential tech issues, changing tastes, maybe some cultural sensitivity mixed in. It's like Capcom opened up Pandora's box of survival horror, and then they were like, actually, let's just close this back up for now.
It's a perfect analogy, and I think it's that very mystery, that feeling of a story untold, that makes Resident Evil 1.5 so fascinating.
Yeah, no, for sure. It really is. It's like finding a hidden passage in like a haunted house. You know there's something down there, something creepy, but you never get to see it.
Right.
And that's almost worse, you know? Like just leaving it to your imagination.
It's true, the unknown. It always has that power.
Yeah.
Especially with horror. But even though we'll probably never actually play Resident Evil 1.5, there's still a lot we can learn from it, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. We talked about all the tech stuff, the whole horror scene back then, even those little hints about the content itself. But what's the big takeaway? Like, what's the impact of this this Ghost game on gaming history?
I think it's a powerful reminder, that some ideas, some creative paths, they're maybe best left unexplored, or at least approached really, really carefully.
Okay, yeah. Like maybe Capcom, they stumble onto something about horror, something so real, so messed up that they realized it was better left alone.
Exactly. It's kind of a paradox, right? Because by not releasing it, 1.5 just became even more legendary.
Oh, totally.
It proves that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we never actually have to face. The ones we just imagine, fueled by rumors and whispers and stuff.
Man, that's a thought. So where does that leave us? The players who never got to experience it, are we like cursed, doomed to wander these halls of gaming history, haunted by what could have been?
I wouldn't say cursed, no. Intrigued, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
The whole thing with Resident Evil 1.5, it reminds us that there's always more to find, new kinds of fear to discover, even in these stories we think we know. And who knows, maybe those what-ifs, those paths not taken, maybe they're what keep survival horror alive.
Yeah, like keeping the spirit alive.
Right. It's like they say, the map is not the territory. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones we only hear about, the ones we never actually get to go on. But the stories, they stick with us.
They do.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the mystery of Resident Evil 1.5. Until next time, keep your flashlights charged and watch out for those shadows.